Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Wings Podcast. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri. On today's show, we will meet Sahil Shah, a pre sales consultant working in the IT enabled services industry. Sahil is a voracious reader, and his choice of books represents an eclectic and diverse set of interests, such as climate change, contemporary history, and investigative journalism. Sahil is a firm believer in the power of reading as a means to live an enriched life and publishes his thoughts and ideas on his blog called That Guy Who Reads. Welcome, Sahil, to this episode of Wings Podcast.
Thank you so much, sir, for inviting me to talk and be a part of this wonderful initiative. Happy to be here.
Same here. It's honor and privilege is ours. So, why don't we begin our conversation to know a little bit more about the professional role that you're playing in the IT-enabled services industry, which is popularly known as either a BPO or a BPS industry, which is has been a big boon to the Indian economy in many ways. But let's hear from you the work that you do as a pre-sales consultant there, and then your general thoughts around this industry and what excites you in doing what you're doing.
Sure, sir. So my role and my job for the longest time to my wife was a little bit like Chandler's job, Chandler from the TV show Friends.
Yes.
So it was very difficult for me to explain to her what I did. For all practical purposes, I was a quote unquote data transponster, which is a joke from the TV show.
Yes.
But thankfully the situation has changed. So the analogy that I sort of use to describe my role is whenever the government wants to build a road, right, they release what is known as a tender, right? And there are different infrastructure companies that respond to the tender, right? So my role is a little similar. When a big global client, a Fortune 500 company, right, wants to outsource something, be it IT or a business process like finance and accounting, they release what is known as an RFP, right? And my job as a pre-sales consultant, I work with a lot of different teams and a lot of different stakeholders from within my company to prepare a solution, a proposal, and submit a response to the RFP. So that is what I do for a living. It's exciting and it's fairly challenging work because of as you can imagine, there are a lot of moving parts when one works on an RFP, right? Typically, it's a multi-year contract. It entails a lot of different technology components as well, right? So it's the challenge of it that excites me. It's working with all different stakeholders from different parts of the organization that really gets me going. It sort of enables me to build my expertise in areas outside of my core competency that the role requires of me, right? So it's exciting. It's fun. This is what I've been doing for the last 7.5, 8 years. So here we are.
Interesting you say this, because what I'm able to kind of sense over here, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it does involve a fair bit of creative thinking in the terms of what is being asked by the client through the request for proposal, the RFP, and trying to kind of decipher it and then put together various pieces of the puzzle, like the tender for let's say a large bridge that the government wants to build, let's say, and there are a whole lot of things that go into it. So there's a fair bit of creative thinking that goes around it. But at the end of the day, what you're delivering is a solution which gives fair bit of predictability in terms of results that the client is expecting. So it's fairly process oriented, isn't it? I mean, so somehow in my mind, process thinking and creative thinking are kind of two ends of the spectrum.
Right. So more than creativity, it's actually driven a lot by technical requirements that the client details as a part of the RFP. The process itself starts with a pre-qualification questionnaire or an RFI. It then moves on to an RFP, and then it moves on to a solution defense, and then it moves on to sort of like a contract negotiation phase, right? So it's a multi-month engagement. Typically for every milestone that I've described, so it varies from industry to industry and client to client, but largely it follows this order. But for every milestone, we have a finite number of days in which we have to sort of prepare a response and submit it, right? Be it an RFI or an RFP, right? In an RFP, typically there are a lot of details provided by the client, which will help us enable us to design the solution. A solution would typically contain elements like what technology levers or what tools and platforms are we positioning, how are we going to bring the work to wherever it is we'll be delivering it from, right? So for example, if the work is based onshore, right, and we are proposing a certain location for that work, right? So how are we going to transition the work or migrate the work from that location to whichever location we are proposing as a part of the solution, right? So that's the first step. That is then followed by the operational solution. How are you actually going to run the process, right? So for example, there are nuances, differences in ways of working, right? The number of hours that people work for varies from country to country, right? So that sort of creates additional capacity when you move work from a certain location to another location, right? There are other factors that also come into play. How you run the process is a part of your operational solution, right? And then there are other technology components that also go into it. So it entails a lot of moving parts, a lot of different areas that are sort of packaged together. And I forgot to mention the most important part of an RFP submission, and that's the pricing and commercials, right? What is it the customer will have to pay to migrate the service and uh, you know make sure that it runs seamlessly for 5 years or 3 years or whatever the contract term is, right? So that's the most important part of any RFP submission. Yeah, I mean, these are some of the different elements that go into a typical submission.
So, apart from the joy that this job is probably giving you, because that's what you've been doing for now a few years, I'm sure there are some hair-tearing moments as well. That is also a part of the
Absolutely.
job. I think it comes as a package, but and it kind of it's true for every job or every role, whatever you do, But broadly, if I were to say that, these are the two or three things Sahil has learned about himself in through the role that he is playing in the IT enabled services. Because I always believe that work is also a way to discover many facets of oneself.
Yeah.
Whilst working in a team, I may not be aware about the behavior that I exhibit at work. It's the others who kind of give me feedback, either direct or through various cues that I get. But then it's as much a process of self discovery as much as it is to build a kind of prowess of a certain kind, skills and knowledge, etc. So I'm wondering, what are those smaller elements of self discovery that your work is probably given you?
I think for me, sir, the biggest one is resilience. I didn't think I could deliver under, high pressure situations, but I think it's something that I've learned to accept as a part of the job, and I've gotten really good at it to the point where I've started to enjoy it now, right? It obviously comes with the job, but it's something that I enjoy as well now. It's made me realize that I am a lot more resilient than I thought I was, when I started my career 7, 8 years ago. So that's I think the biggest takeaway from my role, from my job, from what I've been doing over the last few years. So,
And in all this, who is that guy who reads?
so
And why
I
does he read? You've said you are a voracious reader. So, and yes, the topics are quite eclectic. Climate change, contemporary history, investigative journalism, these are like big words. So who is that guy who reads, and how did he find that love for reading?
I do believe that reading has opened up windows into worlds which are completely removed from mine, right, which has sort of led to a lot of value addition, a lot of knowledge addition over the years. It actually began, if I were to sort of divide my love for reading into phases, right? The very first phase that I remember is the Enid Blyton phase. So I still remember my father got me my first copy of The Secret Seven, and this is when I was in the third or the fourth grade. And I think I haven't looked back from that point on. So the Enid Blyton phase then slowly gave way to the Franklin Dixon phase, the Hardy Boys, right? And from
Yes.
there it moved on to, Robert Ludlum and John Grisham and Jeffrey Archer and so on and so forth. So I can distinctively trace my journey from that point on. So that's how it all started. It's intensified a lot over the last few years because I've made sort of a very conscious effort to read only non-fiction. I've moved away from fiction. I'm trying to read a lot more non-fiction because I do believe that non-fiction is a crystal ball that works, right? It shows you a future in a way that nothing ever can or ever will, right? And I think it's also about value addition with me, right? I do have this sort of knack or this tick, if I may call it that, right, for knowing things, for learning about new things which are completely removed from what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. So that's what sort of gets me going. My wife is a little, she doesn't get how I can read such intense books at the end of a long hard day at work, but I thoroughly enjoy it.
I
So
was I
yeah.
was I was reading your blog, that guy who reads, and I was kind of intrigued with the, one of the article that you have written, whose title is "Three Ways to Decide What to Read Next." Not many people tend to write this, but I'm going to read out one line from your own blog to you right now, and
Sure, sir. Yeah.
and if you can throw more light as to what is it that you're trying to say here.
Yeah.
Here it is. I mean, what you've written, and I quote, "I've realized that it's important to have a range and depth in one's reading material. Learning about the world and how it works in areas that are much removed from what you are interested in opens your eyes to possibilities." Unquote. Throw some light here.
So I do believe it comes back to the kind of environment in which we all operate and function on a day-to-day basis today, right? Everything is instant. Everything is about social media first, right? Everything is about uh, OTT, right? I believe that if you want to create a depth of any kind, right? If you want to talk about a topic, it's very important to cultivate reading habits. It's very important to sort of pick up books in that area and go through those books. I do believe that reading is a habit that is dying. I do believe that anything, and this is a line that I'm picking up from a book that I just recently finished. It's called Stolen Focus by Yuan Hari. It says that anything worth saying, right, it cannot be said in 280 characters on Twitter, right? It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy. So that's where that comes from. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right. I mean, today, of course, we live in a world, whether we like it or we don't like it, where there is so much of information out there which is coming to me through the apps and the zillions of apps that sit
Yeah.
on my phone, and each app is calling for my attention. There is this thing called notification, which in the morning when I open up my phone, the screen is full of so many notifications unless I turn them off for a particular
Yeah.
app. But then each app is craving for my attention, and in many ways I wonder if uh, I rather wonder, I somehow am getting more and more convinced, Sahil, that there seems to be, unlike the consumer economy, where you know uh, businesses would produce products or services, could be biscuits, tea, or any service, travel or whatever. so that I consume their product or service. Essentially that's the revenue that they earn through my actual purchase of a tangible good and a tangible service. But there seems to be an attention economy out there, or something called an attention merchants out there, whose only job is to
Absolutely.
ensure that my mind and all my attention stays tuned to something. So, I mean, that's the world that has got created, and thanks to pandemic and sadly the COVID, online is the only way of engaging. And so how do you look at how I look at the world through my own, let's say, actions, like reading or whatever, to what is fed to me by the attention merchants? I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around what's going on out there, and I'm actually a bit more worried than being happy about what's happening today.
So everything that you are seeing on a day-to-day basis, right, online is a function of what you've clicked on, what you've seen on these platforms in the past. You're effectively living in an echo chamber where your thoughts, your opinions are amplified. So what's happening as a result of that is you are not being exposed to the other side. You are forgetting to have debates. You are forgetting to have conversations. You're forgetting to have a rational dialogue with yourself. So that's what's happening. And I'll give you another example of what I'm talking about, right? News today consists of Rahul Gandhi said this, Narendra Modi said this, right? What are you going to learn, or what are you going to draw by reading news like that? The popularity of apps like InShots, right, where they sort of give you condensed versions of news articles, should tell you in itself that we're moving in a direction that is completely detrimental to having conversations, learning about things, going into the depth of things, so on and so forth. How many of us actually sort of pay to read long form articles on news websites, right? None of us do that. So it's a bit of a tricky situation in the sense that we are all living in echo chambers. We've got 24 hours in a day, out of which we've got 3 or 4 hours to spare. If you're living in Mumbai, you have even less, right? How you choose to spend those 3 to 4 hours a day is up to you entirely. Eventually, and I completely get it, because I also end up doing this. You want to submit to the whims and fancies of these attention merchants, right? At Meta, at Netflix, at Google, because it is easy, because it is right there. I will not take the effort to sit down at the end of a long, hard day at work and read a heavy book on climate change. That's difficult. The other
So
part of it, so yeah,
go
sorry,
ahead,
go
go
on.
ahead, please go ahead. No, please go ahead.
The other part of it is the constant distraction, right? Reading in general has migrated from a physical book to a tablet now, right? Now the distractions available to us on a tablet are many, and the temptations are also there. When was the last time that we were actually able to read a book properly for hours on end without getting distracted either by a phone or by other applications on the tablet? It doesn't happen. And that's where this whole concept of attention merchants comes in, right? You have only limited time in the day, and all these platforms are competing for your attention, because at the end of the day, you are the product, right? In tech, I'm sure you must have heard this. If it's free, it means you are the product, right?
Yes,
So it
yeah.
just it,
Yeah,
so
lunch
it
lunch
boils
is
down to
never
that everyone.
free. Lunch is never free, as they say.
Exactly. So if it's free, it means you are the product, and they are all competing for your attention, and you've got only 3 to 4 hours a day, and that's it. The way, and there are other factors also that are sort of forcing you to continue using these platforms, right? Auto playing of videos, the endless feed on Facebook and Instagram, the feed that never ends, right? So all these are sort of designed to get you to stay on these platforms for as long as you can, and all this while it's eating away your time, which you could possibly be investing in reading a book and learning about things, right? Or knowing things in areas that are completely removed from what you do, for a living, right? And it's exciting, it's fun, but unfortunately it is what it is. And I think it's a it's I too am guilty of it. I'll be honest with you, I have noticed that my reading has sort of declined ever since I got my PlayStation. I've noticed that I can't go for long stretches of time without picking up my phone. So I don't remember the last time that I sat for hours, read a book, and did not look at my phone to check my email or whatever. Right. So it's a very sorry state of affairs. I think I also need to take a good hard look at the way I'm going about things. But it's just the way it is now, sir.
No, undoubtedly. I mean, at one level, we can be cynical about the whole thing and kind of lament about the current
Yeah.
reality, which I think just about everybody knows. So it's like this, situation where I know that I am the one who is causing the pain and suffering to myself. I mean, I am allowing my mind to get invested in zillion things, and zillion, and only 5 or 10 of them are actually of interest to me. I'm
Yeah.
actually everywhere and yet nowhere in that sense. I guess that's what it is. But truly speaking, I do remember, when you talked about how you started with Enid Blyton, and then you kind of graduated on through various authors, and I think I've probably walked the same journey. And I've lived and grown up in Matunga King Circle in Mumbai, and there is this place called Maheshwari Udyan, a big round circle, roundabout, where I mean the traffic then isn't what it is today, but there were these booksellers on the road,
Yeah.
and as a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old, I would just kind of go there, land up, and the first thing that I used to do was pick up a book and actually smell it. I don't know what is the title. I don't, as they normally do, pick up a book and look at the back cover and see what is this book about. And the
Yeah.
title,
Yeah.
the front cover, and the back cover. I would not look at the front cover. I would not look at the cover. I'll kind of first take the book and open and smell it, because these are all second-hand used books available then for 10
Yeah.
rupees and 5 rupees. And some
Yeah.
of my prizest collections of my books, and just as your cupboard, as I can see right now on this call, is full of books, and so is mine. I mean, apart from traveling, much of my money has been spent in books, traveling for pleasure, of course, and books. And for me, as a 10-year-old, books were my journey into a fantasy world. I mean, I'm, as much an Enid Blyton and Agatha Christie fan as much I am an Amar Chitrakatha and Tinkle and Chanda Mama fan. The curious child in me would go on some adventures to lands and terrains which only can be imagined in the world of fantasy. And it's not that I was escaping from the real world. The real world of friends and family was equally exciting, but somehow I used to enjoy spending more time in my own private world, imagining things as a 10-year-old, 12-year-old. It could even be, Dashavatar, Indrajal, Amar Chitrakatha comics that I would read. So I don't know. I was fortunate to be introduced to that, and of course, not just English. I used to read a lot of Marathi, which is my mother tongue, and for some reasons, Hindi too. I don't know how and where, and what does this reading does to Sahil? I'm wondering. I mean, I go on a trip on fantasy even now.
So I'll just take a step back, sir. I have a lot of stories about. I stay at Sayan, and back when I started reading, obviously pocket money was fairly limited, right? And I used to actually buy books from the vendors at King Circle and then sell them back once I was done, and then buy more books from them. So I'm very, very familiar with that whole routine. In fact, I remember there was a very popular. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, sir, but there was a very popular library called Abbas Circulating Library.
Yes,
So
I
that
was a
was a very,
member
very
of that
big.
for many, many years.
So was I. So was I, sir. So that was a very big part of my Sunday ritual. So my parents would take me to a bus. I would check out 3 to 4 books at the same time. From there, we would go to have dinner at Udupi or Madras Cafe and a lesser known place called Amba Bhuvan over there. And then from there,
Absolutely.
we'd head to my nana's place in Vadala. So that used to be my ritual for a very, very long time when I was in school. The other the other story I have is they used to have, every school obviously has a handbook, right, that's given out to students and all. Now at the end of the handbook, we used to have pages where they would make entries for library books that we would check out, right? So be it past question papers or be it reference books or whatever, right? So they actually had to attach extra pages to my handbook just to make entries of all the books that I had checked out in that school year. So I'm very, and my schooling was also in Vadala, so I'm very familiar with the King Circle area and all these book vendors, and yeah. So that's that. But even today, sir, I don't. If you ask me what's the one thing that I will find in your bag if I were to open it, it'll be books. So I don't travel anywhere without books. I will forget my toothbrush at times, but the first thing I will pack is the book that I'm reading, and obviously something else if I want to shoot it. I've started putting a lot of thought into the way I want to shoot my books, because now it's going up on the blog and it's going up on social media. So that's another activity I've started to do very diligently. But yeah, here we are. From there, the vendors of King Circle to ordering books online. This has been the journey.
Sahil, I think apart from the various sources of data, information, and knowledge that one gets through various online resources in today's world, of course, books have always been there from the time the printing press got invented 4 centuries back. Uh, and they are there today and they will be there tomorrow. And I think I don't have any research data to say that despite, I would like to believe that despite all the information thanks to Google that is can be searched online, the number of books that are getting published each day is only increasing on various subjects.
True.
Now the
Yeah.
question is then, how do I decide what to read? I mean, what is there some approach or model that you do? Because you read a lot. You finish a book
Yeah.
in 2-3 days, sometimes in a day too, is what you tell me. Is then how do you decide what to read?
Um, so I sort of have this framework that I follow. On a very lighter note, I tell my wife that any good fiction book I will not read, because if it's good fiction, then at some point of time somebody's going to make a movie or a TV show out of it. So there's no point in reading fiction, and it really annoys her a lot. We've had a lot of debates, quote unquote, debate and conversations around that. But jokes apart, I think I have, like I said earlier, I've made a very conscious effort to read only non-fiction, right? And that sort of is my universe from where I pick my books. The next sort of filter I apply is my interest areas, right? So, for example, I have a lot of interest in climate change, contemporary history, especially from World War II onwards. Covering Cold War till the sort of breakup of the Soviet Union, right? So that period of history interests me a lot, right? So that is something that I sort of try and look for as well. Behavioral economics is something else that interests me. Investigative journalism, psychology, mental health, all these are areas of interest, right? So I try and sort of pick out books in these areas. And the way I go about it is, I follow some of these thought leaders, right? So, for example, Bill Gates is a thought leader. Every year, in fact, twice a year, he puts out his reading list on his website, which is the Gates Foundation website, right? And I use that as a filter to sort of shortlist the books that I want to read. If some of them are in the area where I'm trying to sort of build my competency and read more, right? So I add that to my list. That's how I do a short list. Bill Gates is just one example. There are a lot of other thought leaders out there who put out their reading lists on LinkedIn as well, on Instagram as well. So these are some of the filters I apply. McKinsey also has a reading list for executives that they put out, right? So if business is an area that you're interested in, right, and it's almost always what's new, what's trending, and what's latest in the world of business, right? So they do that as well. So these are all the filters I use to sort of shortlist a book. The other very interesting hack that I've found to shortlist books is when you look at the covers of books, you'll often see testimonials from other authors,
Yes,
right? So if when they say never judge a book by its cover, but at least pay attention to it, right? Because you'll more often than not, you'll find an author's quote on the cover, right? And when you look up the author, it'll be, it might just turn out to be something that you like, right? So that's a very unconventional source that I have found to sort of shortlist books, identify books. The I think the last thing that I do is references. I don't think so. When you're reading non-fiction, right, especially non-fiction which has a lot of data points, right? So there tend to be references at the end, right? There's a notes section at the back of the book, right? So that is also a very, very good source for you. So if you want to go into the depth of it, right, go to the reference and check out what is the source of that reference, right? And that's been another very, very interesting way in which I found some really, really good books. So these are some of the things that I do to sort of shortlist my books, have my reading list. My reading list is almost always far ahead of what I can read in the next possibly 1 month or 2 months, and I love it that way. I consciously try and keep it that way. It always has to be ahead. I should never be able to catch up with it, because that gives me something to look forward to, right? So it's a little like Matthew McConaughey's Oscar speech, where he says that he needs, one of the things that he needs is someone to look up to, something to chase, and I think someone to be.
correct.
So yeah, so this is something that I want to look forward to. I don't ever want it to end. I'm running out of space, as you can see. The library behind me is completely full, as is the space below the beds. So I've converted both the beds in my house into storage areas for books and all. uh,
So
there's I
someday, you know what, Sahil, let me offer you a deal. I don't know when, but maybe one day you and I can kind of, collate our books and probably create a library on the wheels.
absolutely,
And
sir,
you and I can,
absolutely.
rent a truck or God knows what, but we can go driving around the country with all our books. But it happened to
Absolutely.
me too. So I think one of the sources of reading for me has been the references, as you said, end of the book. And um, the reading for me, which started at probably storybooks, etc., at age 5 or 6 or 7, I don't know. It continues that even after 5 decades after that. And there was a time in my life about 2 years back or so, I said, "Bahut pad liya." I mean, what do I do with so much of knowledge? I mean, yes, there are so many topics which is of interest to me, and then there's so many authors which I love and follow, both international as well as Indian authors too. I mean, there are some amazing Indian writers which are there right now. And I said, I won't buy any book now. And for almost 2 years, 2.5 years, I haven't gone to Amazon to click any book. But thanks to you, week before last, I ended up clicking on Amazon and buying a book after a good 2 years, which is a book titled "A Woman Is No Man" by Itaf Ram. Something
Yes, sir.
which
Yes, sir.
you did a book review on, and it caught my attention about stories of, it's I think a fiction, about 4 women from Palestine, across
Correct.
4 generations, and when they migrate to New York City, the kind of life they live. But uh, you know all of us uh, have a collection of quotes, and I have my own of them, and some of them I keep and cherish. And One, in the context of the conversation that we are having right now, I don't mind, reading out this quote. I just kept it aside, which is a quote from an author called Richard Bandler, uh, in a book called Structure of Magic. It's a very old book uh, on the subject of neuro-linguistic programming, essentially NLP as they call it, which is about
NLP,
the science of thought and thinking, etc. So I won't go into the details there, but the quote which kind of sits with me and somehow I relate to it, and I apply it to myself more often than not. And I've done it over the last 10, 12 years since the time I've had this book. And the quote goes this, what Richard Bandler says, and I quote, is human behavior, no matter how bizarre it may first appear to be, makes sense when it is seen in the context of choices generated by their own models of the world. The difficulty is not that they are making a wrong choice, but because they do not have enough choices. They don't have a richly focused image of the world. So probably what reading has done to me is it has helped me, give me a perspective of the world, and try to look at it in many, many ways. So one of the authors that I used to read in my college days was an author called Leon Uri. Uri as in Uris. He's a Israeli Jew writer who wrote much of his books in the 50s and 60s, and most of his books were on the Arab-Israel conflict. And there is his first book of his, which actually introduced me to this country called Israel and the entire, the story of Israel and the Jewish migration, the formation of state, is the book called Exodus, which was written from a Jewish perspective. It kind of glorified everything on this side. And interestingly, he wrote another work of fiction called The Hajj, which is a similar story, but seen from the Palestinian Arab point of view. And then when you read both, it's not that you figure out what this conflict is all about, but at least it enhanced or enriched my image of that part of the world which is called Middle East. And there's so much that could be looked at from picking authors, etc. So I don't know, maybe what we could do is, as we are coming, let's say, to the end of this conversation, look at one or two books that you have read recently. Recently could be the last couple of weeks or couple of months, or maybe even during the pandemic days. One or two which has kind of left a deep mark on you for whatever reasons. Love to hear that.
So I think the first book that comes to my mind is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. It's a book written by Bill Gates. I think one of the things that I haven't mentioned is, reading nonfiction exclusively, right? It'll help you to sort of create frameworks within which you can place conversations, right? So if you're having a conversation about climate change, you need to have a context, you need to have a framework within which you can fit that conversation, fit that data point, right? And this book that I'm talking about will help you do that. Bill Gates actually goes on to provide a framework within which you can understand conversations around climate change. I have read a lot of books on climate change, but if anyone is looking to sort of build up their knowledge in this space, right? And I think everyone should, given that it's a reality that's going to impact us in our lifetime. This is the first book to start off with, right? It's a wonderful read. It's an easy read. It's written in a very, very lucid language. You don't need to come from a technical background to understand the kind of concepts that he articulates in the book. So that's one book. The other book that comes to mind is a biography. I don't read a lot of biographies, but this one has stayed with me for a very long time. It's called Educated. It's the story of this girl who's born into a survivalist, fundamentalist Mormon family, and she sort of she goes on to do a PhD at Cambridge. So the biography is basically her journey in an abusive family with an abusive father, with an abusive brother, and how she surpasses all those challenges and goes on to do her PhD. The family was survivalists and fundamentalists. They did not believe in a formal sort of in informal education in medicine, so on and so forth. And it's a very brilliantly written book. So that's another book that I would highly recommend. These are two books that have stayed with me. Yeah, these are the two that come to mind right now.
There are 6 steps which I read somewhere in one of those Sanskrit texts, which says these are simple steps to enhance or appreciate life and living. And these are in sequence, right? It starts from the fundamental step and it kind of rises to the 6th step. The first step, I mean, these are Sanskrit words, and of course I'll translate it in English. The 6 steps are Shravan, Vachan, Chintan, Manan, Kathan, and Lekhan. Translated in English, it's difficult to translate some of those words, but I'll make an attempt. The first step is listening. Second is reading. Next comes reflection and contemplation.
Absolutely.
Next comes speaking, and the last one is writing. So I would like to believe, Sahil, that you have walked all those steps as in terms of Shravan, Vachan, Chintan, Manan, Kathan, and through your blog, which is That Guy Who Reads, you also write. So in that sense, this is I can actually see this happening for me. I'm so happy for you in terms of you walking all those paths, not just one after the other, but probably simultaneously, all of them. I know you when you read, you do a lot of reflection and contemplation too. Otherwise, you wouldn't do those amazing book reviews that you have done. But having done what you have done, both in terms of your professional career, as well as your personal passion and interests in reading, where does Sahil Shah finds himself now? At what crossroads? And what is it that he's looking forward to in the near future for himself and for his near and dear ones, let's say?
In terms of just before I get into that, sir, on a very lighter note, what you mentioned about reflection is so true. My wife calls it the psychopath zone. There are times when I'm just sitting in the chair and staring into space and thinking about things, and she'll look at me and she'll be like, "You're in that zone, aren't you?" So I get what you mean, sir. But yeah, in terms of reading, I think I want to be a lot more focused. I want to be a lot more dedicated. And the other thing that I'm hoping to do, sir, is to apply the stuff that I read, right?
Yes.
I mean, reading about it is one thing, reflecting on it is one thing, and writing reviews is one thing, right? But when I am actually able to apply all that I have read, right, I think that's when the whole point of this exercise, if I may call it that, will be sort of realized, right? So I think that's where I want to get to. It's a little difficult because uh, there are distractions, there is life, all of that happens, right? But I'm hoping that that's something that I'll be able to achieve soon. So that's on the reading front. Professionally, of course, I want to continue growing in my chosen role, in my chosen career. There are a lot of opportunities that this role ideally offers. So I'm looking forward to sort of grabbing those opportunities with both hands and making the most for me and my family. So that's that, sir.
Wonderful, wonderful. All I can say at the end of this conversation, Sahil, is may you, through your pursuit of knowledge, through your reading, through your contemplation, through your writing, move from one level of knowledge and ignorance to the next level of knowledge and ignorance, And may this journey never stop for you, because I guess that's the path each one of us has to follow or take to hopefully become more integrated and more complete at some point in time. So thank you very much for coming on today's podcast. Really enjoyed every moment of this conversation. Just want to ask you at the end of this conversation, where has this last 35-40 minutes left you?
Thank you so much, sir, first of all, for your kind words. It means a lot to me coming from a mentor such as yourself. The last 30-35 minutes have been extremely enriching, in the sense that I've never really spoken about it, right, to the extent that we have over the last 30 minutes. So it's been extremely fruitful. It's been extremely overwhelming as well, to say the least. So yeah, thank you so much for everything, sir.
And next time when I am in Mumbai, let's go for a walk on the cobbled streets of Mumbai to search for some good books, where you smell one book, I smell one book, and we gift each other a book, and then celebrate it with a nice South Indian coffee somewhere.
Absolutely, sir. Madras Cafe it is.
Absolutely. Okay, Sahil, goodbye.
All right, sir. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Thank you for your time today, my dear listeners. This is your host, Milind Agnihotri, signing off. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. This podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as a piece of any professional advice. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of its guest. Creators of this podcast expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any direct or indirect, consequential or other damages arising out of any individual's use of this podcast. For feedback and suggestions, please write to wingsindia75@gmail.com. Thank you.